Well, I think for to project a good narrative about one's country, to promote national reputation, requires consistency. It requires agreement amongst the key players, the key leaders, about the nature of the vision, the nature of the identity, and it requires credibility. And one of the challenges that Georgia continues, and Georgia's not alone in this, that Georgia continues to struggle with, is that I don't think that there is a cohesive sense between the government and civil society and the academic community about what Georgia's narrative should be and how it should be projected. So I think that is it's unrealistic to expect Georgia to be able to produce that kind of narrative at this point in its evolution. We talked about Ukraine. We talked about how Ukraine changed public perceptions of Ukraine, starting in 2014 and moving forward. It is true that Ukraine started at a place of lack of knowledge. It started from a place where nobody wanted to talk about what was happening in the war. It started at a place where there was not agreement amongst government leaders about what to say about Ukraine. And it is only when they made a concerted decision to coordinate, to be honest about the failures as well as successes, the deaths on the battlefield, the destruction of infrastructure, that their version of the story actually got out there, and that was the version of the story that ultimately contradicted Russia's narrative that had been dominating to that point. So Ukraine is a model except for one important detail. What drove Ukraine to make it consistent, make their narrative consistent? War, crisis, conflict. It is a fact that when a nation is under threat, and that is really an incentive to get the message right. Fortunately for Georgia is not in that kind of crisis. It is not in that kind of crisis that forces that cohesive messaging. So I think the challenge is how to arrive at some kind of cohesive projection of Georgia, short of being forced into it by circumstances beyond Georgia's control.
To ask the following question, how are national reputations built, especially in a period of competing and sometimes quite divisive or fractious narratives?
Well, I'll tell you a secret about the origin of this panel. I was asked by the conference organizers to put together a panel on disinformation, and I said no. We don't need another discussion of disinformation. We are overloaded on the subject. When we talk about disinformation, nobody even listens anymore because they think they know all the answers. So I thought, how could I get to the very real problem of disinformation without calling it disinformation? And that's when I settled on using Nick Cull's concept of reputational security. Turned another way, we're really talking about disinformation. We're really talking about effective influence projection in the face of adversarial attacks on image, on identity. But what I wanted was a fresh way of thinking about the issues, and I do believe, and I'm very proud of my panelists for providing that perspective, both from the external perspective. We had Nick, a Brit living in California, who is one of our country's great experts on public diplomacy, and James, another Brit living in Sweden, who brings his incredible experience in the realm of the relationship of psychology and disinformation and defense. And then I brought the beating heart of the panel, if you will, were our speakers from Ukraine and Georgia, to the people who, as I said, of Vladimir, who are living inside the story, who are living that experience, and I think each of them, all three of them, did a wonderful job of telling that story from the inside, but doing it in a way that was objective and impartial. So that was my hope for the panel, and I'm pleased to say that I think it happened. Right?